Hi guys, I'm James Harvey. I'm a reporter for HFM Week, which is part of the Pageant Media Network, and I have written about a dozen articles in cryptocurrency, which apparently qualifies me as a crypto reporter now. So I know about as much as anyone else does. As I'm sure you're all aware, Bitcoin last year had a bit of a wild ride. Went from, I think, 1,000 at the start of the year to 20,000 by the end, and now it's back at 7,000. So, or maybe 8,000, can't remember now. But in the process, we sort of saw the rise of crypto hedge fund, which is, I don't know, by some estimates, probably about 150 of them now. Most of them run by people who aren't usually hedge fund experts themselves, kind of tech geeks about my age, who decided to try their hand at running a hedge fund. These sort of fund structures come up with their own kind of problems that you don't see in a standard hedge fund, to do with custody, auditing, fund administration. All seems to be very different from a more traditional long-short equity hedge fund, for example. And panelists today all have something to something to contribute to understanding how these funds work. So I'll just introduce everyone. To my left is Mark Powers. He's a partner at Baker and Hostetler, previously part of the SEC's enforcement division. He sort of advises funds on setting up, cryptocurrency investment hedge funds. Next is Skylar Steinke from Gemini, who is involved in business development and was previously on the fund admin side. Next is Scott Foster from Kingdom Trust, which was recently acquired by BitGo, which is a sort of cryptocurrency hot wallet and cold storage provider. So he works on the custody side. And last is Todd Briggs from RSM, who is working on audit for cryptocurrency hedge funds. So I guess probably the best way to start, because it's a very sort of fast-moving asset class, is just to go down the panel and ask what the sort of major issues are at the moment. So Mark, if you could start us off with kind of what the state of play is on the legal side, really, with
Sure.
setting up funds.
Okay, great, thanks, James. So first of all, this is club soda, so let's just understand that to start with. So on the legal side, as James indicated, I started my career at the SEC. I do a lot of securities regulatory advisory work, a lot of SEC defense work and the like. And what you all have seen over the last several months, since the summer when the SEC put down a 21A report, kind of effectively saying that this DOA kind of token was in fact a security under federal securities laws, they've kind of laid down the idea that most ICOs, most tokens, whether you call them utility tokens or otherwise, they are going to view as securities that are subject to the securities laws, federal securities laws, state, federal, or otherwise. So you need to understand that that's going to be an area of focus of the securities regulators, the U.S. Attorney's Office, state regulators. And what you have seen a lot of, and we wrote an article about this in late December, which was published in Block Tribune, be happy to share that with anyone that's interested, is a lot of SEC enforcement actions primarily focused in on cases involving non-registered securities offerings, but in some instances, fraud. Some people claim to be the grandson of President Grover Cleveland, or that they promised traditional securities fraud kind of stuff, promised returns of 3,000%, if you buy our token. So those are the easy cases. But the more challenging cases are when you get to the distinction between what is deemed to, what is deemed a security or what's an investment contract under securities laws under the 33 Act, and whether or not it's an investment of money by others, or by investors, in what's deemed to be a common enterprise to kind of build up that enterprise, whether someone else is basically building it up in a way that the profits that are going to be derived are by that person's efforts and not by the investors. That's what's called the traditional Howey test. And the SEC's taken a very long-standing position that if any money's being put in, as if it's like money put into like an initial public offering, that is going to be a security. And you heard Chairman Clayton just the other day, as well as the CFTC Commissioner before the Banking Committee, say he's not yet once come across one ICO that's not, in his mind, a security offering. So we're advising clients effectively that unless you have a fully developed business, you're going to be doing tokens that are truly utility, such as it's being used for some sort of and this is not individualized advice, okay? This is more, unless you've got a fully developed business and you're not using any of the monies that are being raised by these utility tokens for any form of a building out of your business or your applications or otherwise, you're likely to be a security, so you need to be considering applications or exemptions from the federal securities laws. So we're advising in that space. We obviously do the defense side as well, where the SEC is going after people. And the interesting issue there, if I just may finish up the thought then, is, wait a second, most of these offerings that are being done, these ICOs, will be done offshore. And when they're being done offshore, the SEC is taking the view that, and state attorney generals, like Texas, for example, people in Texas read about it on the internet. They lie potentially on their applications saying they were in like Aruba or someplace else to acquire these tokens, because they were specifically they was designed to not be sold at all to any US citizens. So these citizens of Texas or elsewhere lied on their applications, somehow got the securities, and these state regulators and federal regulators are taking a view, wait a second, you're on the internet and people in our jurisdiction in the US bought it, you're subject to our jurisdiction. Those are going to be the interesting hot button issues as to whether or not those ICOs are actually going to be subject to even US courts for enforcement efforts.
And Skylar, I guess on the admin side, a big topic, particularly for crypto funds, is kind of this integration of technology particularly with cryptocurrency exchanges. There's a hell of a lot of them, and there's only about half a dozen, I guess, that have any real institutional infrastructure. So just wondering, from your side, how is, I guess, what are the sort of evolving best practices in fund admin?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's many exchanges out there that managers are using to set up their funds and integrate with. And as a result of that, we also on the fund admin side have to integrate and connect to these exchanges to pull down the data to reconcile the portfolio. And the challenges as of late with the exchanges would be, number one, a lot of these exchanges, there's been delays just with the hot topic of Bitcoin out there. They've stalled on opening new accounts, for example. That's one challenge for existing fund managers. The second would be some of the exchanges, they simply don't accept U.S. accounts, U.S. resident accounts, so they've had to choose alternate exchanges to work with. Another more of a technical item would be just some of the exchanges, the way you can pull down data from the platforms. They have limitations, so maybe the manager has 1,000 trades a month that's coming through that exchange. The platform via API can only accept or give you a maximum of 500, for example. So those are some technical limitations we have to work through to make sure we can pull the full fund data off the platforms that are available. And these exchanges, there's many different ones. I always get asked, well, what's the most popular exchange? And it really depends on what they're trading. If you look at Bittrex, that's one of the exchanges out there. They can hold or trade on 190 of the cryptocurrencies out there. If you go to CoinMarketCap, there's over 1,500. So by way of deploying their strategy, they have to really segment out and get on many different exchanges to really deploy that strategy, what makes sense for them.
Yeah. And Scott, I guess on sort of the custody front, my understanding is sort of, well, when I was last speaking to a lot of hedge funds getting set up earlier last year, was that there wasn't really a good custody solution. A lot of them were choosing to do it themselves, and it involved all sorts of incredibly cumbersome kind of in-house arrangements with air-gapped computers, and I think in some cases people were rewriting their wills to make sure that their partners in hedge funds could get access to their private keys if they were hit by a bus or something. But I think my understanding is that you're one of the few custodians that actually works extensively with cryptocurrencies. So how are you sort of evolving? How's your business changing, and how are you sort of getting the hang of working with these assets?
Well, it takes up about 110% of my time these days, so it's definitely changed the projection of our business. But I think one of the things that we did early on was we had been kind of in the custody space for crypto for about 2 years, because we were doing a lot of the self-directed IRAs and retail accounts there. And then we took the institutional business that we had developed back in 2011, and we started to marry the two concepts. We went out, we looked at who some of the participants were from the service provider side, And we got extremely comfortable with BitGo, who's obviously now in the midst of acquiring us, but we got very comfortable with their technology on the blockchain and their ability to tether this stuff and keep it in the wallets and build it out off the platforms. So we spent a lot of time working with them and integrating the solution that we would use and making a process that we thought would work well with the street, because we initially had to look at speed and security, and of course initially we focused predominantly on security. So the next part of this solution that we'll attempt to do is try to build speed and work with multiple exchanges and giving access to more of these digital assets. You know, currently we're working with 7 of the digital assets. That should be expanding here pretty quickly in the first quarter. I think you'll look at like ERC20, Dash, Zcash, and some of the others that we currently don't have. There's certain currencies, for example, like Monero, that we have trouble because they have an issue trying to tether that and working on the software to get it into the wallets. So that's there. All these currencies or these assets may not be, we may not be capable of custody. But we're continuing to work on those, and then of course there's the ICO issue that we're also looking at. So I think you know, the speed is one major issue that we're dealing with. The ICOs is probably the second biggest issue that we're trying to get our arms around with and figure out a solution.
And so on the sort of audit side, it seems to have been, particularly last year, very difficult for a lot of auditors to get their head around just the whole cryptocurrency space. A lot of exchanges don't tend to have very good data, trade reporting data, for example, and valuations are kind of all over the place. So how are you getting to grips with it?
Yeah, so there's a tremendous amount of audit risks here that are unique to this asset class that you don't see in the typical hedge fund, custody being one of those. I'm excited that people like Kingdom Trust and others are rushing to market with a solution in the custody space, because from an audit perspective, the ability to send a confirmation to a custodian is going to be much easier than to get our heads around self-custody. It's that particular risk around self-custody comes down to proving ownership of those assets. So how do you ultimately prove, and ownership is 10/10, it's based on having the private key. So how do you prove out somebody has a private key? I find that these are all bespoke solutions as well. So you'll figure out, you know, here's what we're gonna do on Bitcoin and any fork of Bitcoin. We're gonna do some form of transaction signing which cryptographically proves that they have the private key. Set that aside. What do you do on Monero? Completely different basket of it's a privacy coin, Dash, Zcash. I mentioned a couple of these. And so we're still coming to grips with those particular issues. We were fortunate enough to have kind of a stable of proprietary trading clients. I'm a partner in Chicago, and that was part of my client base along with asset management, who've really, they were early adopters. They've stayed in the more liquid coins, but they've presented us the opportunity to kind of learn with them and grow with them. And so that's been a very interesting process. So you've got rights and obligations, which inherently has never been a big assertion for us to tackle. You've got, we've actually been talking a lot about the valuation risk around your counterparty exposure to the exchange. So if you think about the exchange as being a receivable, and you've got serious, significant counterparty risk there, that at any point they could be hacked. They don't have the ability to deliver. They shut down. You mentioned, I think Skylar, you mentioned, you know, they might just shut down for a couple days. They might shut down particular withdrawals in certain fiat or certain cryptos. So there's all this kind of valuation allowance concept that's floating around in our head as well.
James, if I just may follow up on the reason why it was important, I'm not sure everybody understands what the point that was being made by Scott on the qualified custodian issue. Okay, so we're advising clients on setting up these crypto funds now. Okay, so small funds that are offshore, it's easy because if you're all completely offshore, you're probably not subject to U.S. jurisdiction. Okay, if your investors are all offshore as well. But now let's just say you want to have U.S. investors, And let's assume you want to open up in the US. And let's assume you stay out in New York for argument's sake, and you open up in New Jersey or Connecticut, because for any number of reasons. Once you get to over 100, 110 million in assets under management, you know, and a lot of them have not been there yet, so it hasn't really been an issue. They've been small, they've been 25 or 50. But let's assume you see another explosion of 10 times fold of the assets growing in value. And you get to 110 million, you now need to possibly register with the SEC. When you're required to register with the SEC, and you must register at 150 of assets under management as a registered investment advisor, you cannot, you must have custody, you must follow the custody rules of the SEC. And those custody rules, among others, require you to use a qualified custodian, a QC. The solution that, and this is something I was talking with both Todd and Scott about just within the last couple of weeks, you know, because this is cutting edge stuff, right? You know, you now have an entity that at least some practitioners believe will satisfy the government and the SEC as satisfying that custody requirement for purposes of establishing, you know, the kind of standards that are looked for by the government.
Right.
I think, I mean, to further that, you can have everything at a QC, but then what is the exchange? So the assets you leave on an exchange, is that at a good location to satisfy the custody rule, is another issue. You know, these exchanges, back to Skylar's point on the exchanges, are all different shapes and sizes. And they, you know, a lot of them lack regulation. Some of them do literally no AML KYC. I mean, you can go out on Shapeshift and exchange your crypto for another crypto. They don't know who you are, they don't know who the other side of the deal is. And to me, you've kind of ventured off into a space as an asset manager that maybe you shouldn't be going. Because you inherently know and has a reasonable belief that they don't do any AML because they didn't do any AML on me on the way in. So a lot of gating issues. And to your point then, a lot of those funds, so you mentioned 150 on the top, potential funds in this space. I see a lot of those being under that 100 million intentionally. People don't want to register because they don't want to tangle with the SEC custody rule. And until there's any real clarity, there's any real, you know, a good, healthy community of QCs, you don't have to be the only one, Scott. Just competition's good.
It's coming.
You know, insurance for folks like yourself, insurance for the exchanges, all kind of gating issues at this point. And then finally, banking. I see banking as a significant issue in this space, and the number of banks, some folks were in and then some folks are now out. And that's kind of left people hanging. And the time to set up an account at a bank or the time to set up an account on an exchange, this is significant lead time that we wouldn't traditionally see in a more traditional hedge fund asset class. So.
Yeah. On the point you were mentioning before about AML and KYC kind of considerations, another thing that seems to be coming up recently is this desire for crypto-denominated share classes in hedge funds. And I was wondering if you guys could give your thoughts on sort of how that complicates matters further, I suppose, in terms of knowing who's buying what.
Skylar?
Yeah, absolutely, it does. It's been a topic of conversation as of late. Unique nuance that we see on the admin side, where managers are looking to set up crypto-denominated share classes, basically a Bitcoin share class, where an investor can come in using Bitcoin and subscribe to the fund, or conversely redeem out of the fund and receive Bitcoin as the proceeds. So that presents a few different challenges for us operationally. How do we best approach AML, KYC, obviously on the fund, and then the underlying investor source of funds, where that may be coming from the wallet essentially. So we've had to develop a whole other AML policy based on those share classes, working with approved wallet providers on our side that we happen to know that do the KYC and the underlying investor from the account level. So that's kind of a unique nuance that continues to develop as new funds are launched. It would be Bitcoin and now Ethereum, another cryptocurrency is looking. That's another play for another share class that folks are looking at as well.
So we're looking at the same issue quite a bit, and we're starting to get closer on contributions on the way in if they're coming from funds that are supposed to be required to do AML, KYC, that we're getting a little bit more comfortable that way, but we still are not there. And then on the way out, we're still at the point where it's gotta come out as fiat, even if it, you know, is held in crypto, but on redemption, it's gotta come out as fiat. But we're spending a lot of time on this as well, with legal and the regulators, and trying to get our arms around this as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are some, I think there's some great innovation in the AML KYC space, so I think it will evolve as with everything else in this space, and in 18 months, it's gonna look completely different than it does today. But, I mean, there is, on the public blockchains that are available out there, there are some, you know, serious analytical tools that people have built and can actually track, you know, has this particular coin that's in this address ever been, not the particular coin, but has this address ever touched a bad address? And going back in time, and you can run these analytics and kind of figure these things out. And so if you take that one step further, you can imagine a time when people can get really comfortable around AML and KYC and where the source of funds and so on and so forth. So more to come.
And Mark, I suppose on the sort of legal side of this, is there any kind of legal issue that gets raised with structuring a fund if you're doing sort of share classes denominated in cryptocurrency? Does that become a tricky?
Well, I think the issues that they've identified pretty much, you know, covers it, it runs the gamut. I mean, you have, I think you have further issues of valuation, you know,
Yeah.
because both for capital contributions and redemptions, evaluate, you know, so I think it gets very complicated. But we are seeing funds where people can be putting in at least contributions in other than fiat, you know. On the other end coming out, redemptions, as you're hearing, you know, at least his fund, you know, his setup, they want to take it out in the fiat.
Okay.
And the reason why they want to do it coming in that way is because most of the people, a lot of these investors are young, right? And they're used to, right? They're used to, you know, this currency, and it's an easier way to raise capital for them. And a lot of them use this as a form of currency these days. I mean, that's just the reality.
Okay. Well, I think that's kind of covered everything else.
So Robert, before you run out of time, obviously, very learned panel, focused on unregistered products right now. But yet we've heard advisors interested in doing options on Bitcoins, futures on Bitcoins. What's your opinion about Bitcoin-related products in the registered world? Is it going to come soon? You know, you have people like Jamie Dimon who say they're fraud. They wouldn't touch it. Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, same thing. Just, you know, talk a little bit about the registered space. Do you think there's a future for it?
I mean, I think the SEC was clear on some of the gating issues, again, with some of the plumbing that's out there. The liquidity's not there, the exchanges are unregulated, the valuation to strike a NAV for a mutual fund product. I mean, they're very clear on kind of, they've given a roadmap to the industry, and I think pieces are falling into place. So exchange regulation, I think, maybe something on the horizon. There's some sword, you know, rattling there. So those are my insights that until those get answered, you're not going to get to a retail product. Maybe we shouldn't have a retail product in this space ever, but anyways.
I mean, there is one retail product that's actually out there.
It's true, yeah.
But I'm not about to promote it on the TV cameras, you know. But there is one retail product that actually people are buying now in their mutual, you know, as a form of a mutual fund in their accounts. So, I mean, it is so. But I'm kind of the view that the SEC had come out with specifically this roadmap. It's exactly right. My own personal point of view is I think the SEC at some point down the road will figure out a way to accommodate this new form of technology, blockchain technology, in a way that it will have the overlap of the traditional securities laws, whether it's a Reg A, you know, where you used to have 3 years of financials and all these other kinds of traditional forms of disclosure documentation. They'll figure out a way to accommodate this new world of disclosures. And just like it took them a long time to figure out how to use the internet for purposes of filings and things like that, a guy like a smart man like Chairman Clayton, he didn't poo-poo and say we're shutting this down. He's doing the right thing by warning people that there's a lot of fraudsters out there. Beware. It's a very volatile thing. It's not for the faint of heart. But he didn't say that this isn't something of the future, nor did Giancarlo, right? And both of them were of the view that let's figure out a way to regulate this. And I do think this is something that they're gonna try and figure out. And that's what's gonna, and so that's, I don't know, I don't know if people, this panel agrees or not.
Yeah, I don't have much to add with that. I mean, honestly, I think the exchange issue, not being regulated, the valuation, getting those are gonna be.
Custody was also one of the.
Yeah,
brought up.
right, until you get, and I think what you gotta do is you gotta see one of the major custodians step into the space as well.
Right, I would echo that as well. Just most of what we've seen on the admin side is just more of a wait and see approach based on the regulators and what they're gonna do, and kind of see what develops from there.
Well, I think we've run out of time, so thanks very much for taking the time to listen. So, thanks to the panelists as well.